Fox News Podcasts presents the Bret Baier Podcast, Common Ground.
There are a number of senators on the Republican side that continue to want to find common ground.
We emphasize the conflict and controversy sells, and I think that's a problem because most Americans look at Washington and see something that's broken.
Why don't we look for ways that we celebrate what this country is capable of doing?
It's amazing what you can do when you get off social media and you start talking and communicating with one another because there is common ground.
With Fox News chief political anchor Bret Baier.
The shipbuilding program in the Navy is in disarray.
This is acquisition malpractice and a terrible waste of time and resources.
Insufficient commercial maritime capacity impacts peacetime trade and supply chains, but also has a great impact on our ability to move things we need to move if we're engaging in combat.
Well, the Navy Secretary up on Capitol Hill, and you see some senators talking about the need for the maritime component to increase. It's time for our Common Ground segment, where we look at bipartisan approaches to some of the nation's big issues. Joining us tonight, Florida Republican Congressman Mike Waltz, and the man you just saw there at the end, Arizona Democratic Senator Mark Kelly. Gentlemen, thanks for coming over.
Yeah, thanks, Bret.
Senator, you've been working together across the aisle on this issue. We heard your soundbite there at the end. Why is this so important right now?
National security issue for us. It's a supply chain issue. If you go back to, say we go back to World War II, 1945, we had 10,000 ocean-going U.S. flagged merchant vessels. When I left the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy in 1986, graduate of that school, we had about 400. When I flew in combat in the first Gulf War, we had about 400 ocean-going flagged merchant vessels. Now that number in the report, it's less than 200. But if you look at ones that are in ocean, like foreign commerce, that number is 80. China has over 5,000. It is a national security imperative that we rebuild the capacity to build ships in our country.
If you look at this report, Congressman, the comparison between U.S. and China, and you consider that 80% of the global trade is ocean shipping, it's pretty stark. And these numbers in this report, and you just outlined some of them there, but between the U.S. and China and where we stand, it's amazing to look at those numbers.
Yeah, it really is striking, Bret, and I'm thrilled to work with Senator Kelly, Senator Rubio, Representative Garamendi. This is a bipartisan, bicameral kind of ringing the alarm bells of how much our maritime power, our shipbuilding, our ship repair has declined, and laying out a strategy to start rebuilding that. And just as manufacturing left middle America in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and went abroad, our shipbuilding has done the same thing. Now put it by point of comparison with China. Last year, China received 1,500 orders for new ships in their shipyards. These are cargo ships, LNG carriers, tankers. You know how many we received? 5. So they're building a massive Navy on the backs of a massive commercial shipbuilding fleet. Ours has atrophied so bad that even if we had a new president come in and say, I need a 500 ship Navy, we need a Reagan-style buildup, we no longer have the steel, the aluminum, the workers, the shipyards to do it again. And that's what Senator Kelly and I's strategy lays out of how to bring that manufacturing, that shipbuilding back to America.
So the report, the recommendations, Senator, reversing the decline of America's maritime power, grow domestic shipbuilding capacity, revitalize U.S. flagged global fleet, evaluate critical infrastructure, ensure freedom of navigation, accelerate polar, seabed, and undersea warfare capabilities. I mean, it sounds to me like that's a big price tag. This seems like it has atrophied over
decades.
Both Republican and Democratic administrations.
Right, over decades. Primarily, I would say, since the 1980s, it's really gone downhill. Over, we're looking at about 40 years or so. About the time that I graduated from college, it started going downhill from there. We only have 20 shipyards in the United States that can build ships, and most of those have to build Navy ships. So the merchant marine has atrophied. There isn't the financial imperative, really. I mean, if let's say you're somebody who's interested in building ships and turning this into a business, hard to make money right now in the U.S. with a U.S. flagged, U.S. crewed vessels. So we've got to change that. We've got to change the incentives. So we're going to take this strategy report and we're going to start working on what will become legislation. And that legislation will provide, maybe tax incentives to do this. We also have to build the workforce. We need about 2,000 more mariners. We need about 10,000 more shipyard workers to build the ships. And we see the results in the Western Pacific right now. If you look at what China's doing with their maritime and naval capacity in, Second Thomas Shoal, Scarborough Shoal off of the Philippines, just harassing their neighbors. That nine dash line where they're trying to take over more territory. That's all about having the maritime capacity to project power, and we've lost that over decades.
We'll continue right after this. With, the budget hawks in your party, Congressman, with debt and the debt clock ticking all the time above 31 trillion. When you look at something like this, you say it's really important, but there's a lot of things that are important for us.
Sure.
Where does this stack?
Well, this stack's right up at the top, Bret, and one of my disappointments was to see $0 from the bipartisan infrastructure deal, the $1.2 trillion big infrastructure package. None of that really went to our shipyards or shipbuilding or ship repair. So step one, I think we could shift some of those dollars in the out year that have already been appropriated. But I think the bigger piece, Bret, is public-private partnerships. As the senator said, how do we incentivize investment? Even foreign investment. South Korea and Japan have taken up a lot of the slack over the years. We get them to invest back in. But much like SpaceX revitalized the space industry, I think there are public-private partnerships that can revitalize the shipbuilding industry.
Senator, I mentioned...
It doesn't have to be all government tax dollars. There's a big private sector
there are
incentive.
ways we can do this and find the revenue somewhere else.
That's
I mean,
right.
we're looking at that. How do you do that? When you think about 98% of all cargo coming to the U.S. trade doesn't come on U.S. ships. So, I mean, the first place to look is right there.
That's right. Yeah, public-private. I mentioned, Senator, that the Navy Secretary had at times a tough Q&A up there on Capitol Hill. Here he's back and forth about paying more attention to climate change than maritime fleet. Take a listen.
Where's your Title X responsibilities on climate change?
On climate change, it actually impacts everything, Senator. It impacts...
Where are your Title X responsibilities that we gave you?
Manning, equipment, training, sustaining.
They don't exist.
You can't... No, they do exist, Senator. I disagree with you.
I'm looking at Title X right now.
And I'm telling you that climate change and the impact that it has on installation readiness actually has an impact on our combat readiness.
Anyway, got heated there, Senator. Climate change is important, and you guys talk about it a lot.
Well, it's also important for the military. I mean, the congressman represents Florida. Florida has significant impacts, from climate. We've got rising sea levels. Those things can affect military installations. And, think about what the investment might have to be, or Virginia as an example that has Norfolk, all those military bases. If you start to get impacted by climate change, now you're going to have to spend money on infrastructure. So climate is something that affects the military. It affects all of us. I went into space over a decade, 4 different times. I could see changes in our planet over that decade, something we need to address, whether it's in Title X or not. Listening to Senator Sullivan, I think maybe that's a valid point, but it's also a valid point that this Secretary of the Navy needs to be working on this issue.
Last thing, for people who say stuff doesn't get done in this place behind us, and it's too partisan to get things done, what do you all say in response to that?
Well, look, I would say that elements of this strategy will be in this next defense bill. We are realizing the problem. We are realizing how far behind we have let this slip and how far behind we are with China. All of those merchant ships that they're cranking out there, thousands and thousands of them, they can, number one, turn any one of them into warships, and number two, they can choke off America's economy tomorrow. We will get this into legislation, and we have to press the administration. This is not just a Navy problem. This is an all of government, all of society. It's about having wrench turners, welders, shipbuilders, and getting America back to building things again, including the very things that bring the elements that our economy need from overseas and export what we're producing here in America.
Congressman, Senator, thanks for the time.
Thank you.